Welcome to another episode of the CarryTrainer Higher Line podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Higher Line podcast. I've got an old friend back today. We are going to talk to you about something super important, protecting kids. Mr. Dave Turely of Tech Safe AZ, formerly a sheriff's deputy and U.S. Marshal. He and his wife, Diana, beautiful lady who just was on screen helping with some audio video, run a company down there teaching people stuff that he spent years learning. Dave and I were chatting the other day on some of the unseen trauma really that happens to people in law enforcement because of their exposure to really bad people and stuff. And that ultimately led us to the conversation of how he started his career as a young detective investigating crimes against children. So Dave, welcome back.
Thank you, buddy.
Let's chat a little bit.
Cool.
So a moment ago, we were talking, you brought up how you got, or how your career took you down the path of working in the investigation side of stuff with, you said crimes against children and unfortunately sex crimes against children, right?
Right.
Talk about that a little bit.
So when I was a young detective starting out, one of my first assignments was crimes against children. We worked sex crimes. I was at a fairly small department. So, I was kind of a jack of all trades there for a few years, got some training and schooling in crimes against children, worked that caseload for a few years. And then many years later, when I got into the fugitive business, I was able to be on the back end of that caseload, which I much preferred. I was simply picking up the defendants after there was an indictment, after a case was made. So I much preferred just picking up the bad guys at the end of the case, as far as, opposed to the front end of the case, responding to a fresh crime scene or interviewing a child when this is all, a brand new occurrence.
I guess one of the things that when you were talking the other day, so I've made it somewhat our mission at CarryTrainer to utilize the platform that we have to help bring attention to these types of things. I think it's definitely not fun stuff to look at, but I think too often we get mired down or just busy in life, and we forget about all of these young people that can't protect themselves. And I guess what I was thinking about as we were chatting is, one, you're coming into these situations after some creep, uncle, teacher, swim coach, whoever, did some horrible stuff, right? So back in the day on the investigation side of things, there had to be stuff that people saw, some things that were indicators of problems. I'm sure not always. Sometimes there's just people that are anomalies that just one day decide to do some bad stuff. But was there things that parents, teachers, other people involved in a child's life could have seen, noticed, picked up on to help intervene sometimes sooner in these abuse instances?
Absolutely. So I can only speak from my personal experience. I want to avoid generalizations or whatnot, but there's usually, a grooming process. There's usually your bad guy or bad girl is going to want to create an environment where they're exposed to their potential victims. So imagine coaching, churches, schools. They're going to engineer some type of a social setting where they have maximum exposure to these kids.
Paint a picture of what that might look like.
Drivers, shuttle bus, school bus drivers. And I hate to, I'm not trying to cast shade on anyone.
You want to just say like, hey, wait a minute, I'm a bus driver. I'm not a pervert. Sure.
Anybody within a position of authority, I hate to say it, but anyone with a position of authority over kids, coaches, anybody that's got exposure to children What you want to watch for is those warning signs like alone time. We do a lot of consulting for local churches and schools here. And one of the things I talk about is you want a 2-adult rule. Why not have a 2-adult rule in place where if you have a situation where you're on a field trip or school or church, whatever scenario you can imagine, you want to avoid any situation where there's an adult alone with a child of that age before they can really, teenagers, that's a little bit different, but it's the same scenario. Why not just avoid that altogether? Like having a child get alone in a vehicle with someone or going to a restroom or on a field trip or a church outing, right?
It's crazy how often, I don't know, is it just ignorance that we assume like, oh, I'm a good adult, so this other adult must be good? I remember as a kid, I was telling this to my mom the other day when we were at lunch. I just assumed, because adults always told me, like, if I was doing wrong, I just assumed adults didn't do wrong. Like as a little kid, they didn't lie, they didn't cheat, they didn't steal, because adults were always the one correcting my behavior. So I just assumed they all did things correctly. And of course, us adults know that's not the case. We lie, we cheat, we steal, we do wrong. And we just assume other people are okay. I was reading a story the other day, pretty horrific. 13-year-old boy murders a 4-year-old boy. This happened back in the 90s. I think the kid was born in 1980. The reason the story popped up is he was recently released from prison now as like a 42-year-old, the murderer, and he's getting married, which is interesting. I don't know what kind of chick wants to marry a 13 or a boy that murdered a little kid, but the story caught my attention. So I'm like, well, what happened? How did this happen? So 13-year-old boy's going to a summer camp in the park, and he comes upon this 4-year-old boy. He lures him in the woods, bludgeons him with a rock, chokes him to death, and then sodomizes him with a stick. I mean, like, this is just sick shit, right? So I'm like, what happened with this 4-year-old? Well, the 4-year-old was sent to go to the summer camp by his mom to walk 1/4 mile or something alone to camp. I'm like, 4 years old? Like, there's 4-year-olds that aren't even freaking potty trained. And you just like sent a 4-year-old off to go like, okay, have fun at summer camp. Like, and of course, what a horror for those parents. But thinking about just the stupidity, and I sound terrible in case they ever hear this, because I'm sure they've beaten themselves up for 27 years. But like, to send I was talking about this to a friend of mine. They're like, I wouldn't let my 11-year-old, who's like a big kid, go walking a 1/4 mile down the country road just because cars run you over and stuff like that. I think there's like a fine line between overprotecting, but you little 4-year-old. So I shared a story. I'm going to shut up. I shared a story about that. And yesterday, when you and I were talking about this, about that pedophile in my town that got 90 days for raping a girl, somebody in the comment section shared that they were a Uber driver, and they just told the story about somebody putting a 6-year-old, called Uber, put their 6-year-old in the back seat and wanted them to drive the kid like 10 miles. And he looks back, he's like, I'm not taking a 6-year-old alone anywhere. And they're like, no, we do it all the time. So against his better judgment, he did it, but he made a phone call, it sounds like, and he like let the phone roll through the whole drive. And then he gets to wherever these to drop this kid off, and the parents don't come out, and he's got to like walk the kid up to the door, and the parents just like let the kid in and are like, thanks. I'm like, who the would put a 6-year-old alone in an Uber with just a stranger? So like, is that where a bunch of this stuff happens? Because there's just parents that are not paying attention and just like putting their kids in weird situations or unacceptable situations?
That's exactly right. And it ties in. This is real simple. It ties into what you and I teach. It's the same situation. We just need to wrap our minds around this and provide education for people to get their minds around it. But you talk about situational awareness, which I totally agree with. Combative skills, firearms, that's fantastic, but nothing really trumps situational awareness, right? So these same parents, they would be vigilant if there was a swimming pool, like here in Arizona, everyone has a pool. We would never allow children to be out in the backyard with a pool. There's got to be an adult at all times, right? But the same type families will put a child in a car or send a child to a babysitter or something where they know there's some type of a one-on-one situation. So my instinct is I like what you're doing because we want to try to get that out. It's the same package of things that we teach, but we just need to expand that a little bit, right? If you think of it the way guys like you and I are wired already, it's simple situational awareness. It would solve so many problems because I know you'll probably get to this, but on the back end of these things, people are destroyed by guilt. Marriages don't usually survive this when a child is victimized in this way. The marriages don't survive. A lot of times parents literally don't survive. I made the mistake of, I was talking to my daughter about some of this. She's grown and starting her career at the police department. And we were looking at some old press releases and articles from some of my cases. We looked over one where it was a firearms related accident. The 4-year-old brother, there was a shotgun that mom's boyfriend had purchased. It had no trigger guard. It was a 20 gauge single barrel, break open. He loaded the gun, put it behind the bedroom door. The 4-year-old boy was playing with the gun, and his 2-year-old sister came into the room.
Oh, God.
She grabbed the barrel, so picture like a broomstick, to look in it. And then that's when, it fired.
Oh.
So there's obviously no coming back from that. Think of the repercussions for the boy, Mickey,
Oh, God.
the mom's boyfriend, the ripple effect that's going to have. I know I was looking up to my sergeant at the time, who was a pretty grizzled veteran. And I was looking for him to find calmness and strength. I think I was about a 28-year-old young man when that happened. That's still with me. That never goes away. It was horrible.
The story, the vision of what you saw there.
Yeah. And some of the physical things, like it was a cramped bedroom. And, I always have to be careful with my stories, but it was a cramped bedroom and I had to go in alone. And in those days, we did our own photography and videotape, and being in close confines with that and the mess that would create, it was just
that's horrible. That's horrific.
It's just way too much. It's just way too much. But my point is, it gets worse. When I was talking to my daughter, she's Canaan's age, so she gets right on Google, looks up the story, looks up the young mother, and she committed suicide 3 years later. So it's just like that never ends. We didn't look up the boyfriend or the brother, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were similar results from that. It's really sad. But situational awareness, I think, is the first line of defense with that.
Something you or I, most of the people listening, I think would agree, leaving a loaded shotgun with no trigger guard on the floor behind a door where children are present. That's like open fire with kids running around, or like the swimming pool, like you brought up. I mean, even more so, you can fall in a pool, go to the bottom, and still be rescued. You shoot a shotgun at a 2-year-old's head, there's no coming back from that. And the fact that people just don't even think through sometimes these types of situations. Some guy thinks he's doing the right thing. I'm getting a shotgun here to protect the family. And it's weird in this space of people. I will talk about safe gun storage. We did a podcast with my friends from Secure-It that make gun storage solutions, and the pushback from people: don't tell me how to store my guns. I'm not telling you how to store your guns. I would just hate to hear that your 2-year-old got her head blown off. Or if you just do a cursory Google search, I do it all the time in our concealed carry classes. Just pick up a few words: 3-year-old shoots mom, and you just punch that in. You will find a story from the last month in any town USA of a 3-year-old that got mom's gun out of the purse. Or Change it. The dynamic 4-year-old shoots brother. You will find a freaking story. And it's like just that's, we're kind of off topic from the original part, but it's the same thing. Like, what are you thinking about? Like you want to protect your kids, but then you create these situations where the exact opposite is happening.
And just like in the tactical realm, like when you debrief some of these incidents or whatever, it's like a cascade of events, right? Several small, you can't even call them mistakes because sometimes it's just random violence, but it's usually a series of events. Well, I purchased the gun and I didn't unload it. I didn't have it secured, or it's usually 3 or 4 events, right, that lead up to these things. And in the police world, we do training. If an officer gets killed on some traffic stop, that becomes material for the training academy. It's the same thing in life. You can look back and say, well, he didn't check off with his location, or he wasn't wearing his vest. It's always 3 or 4 things when something goes wrong. Usually 3 or 4 things, but same thing with these situations, like that dad said, well, I had showed some friends the gun, so I loaded it and I forgot to unload it. And then he left it behind the door. And then the kids weren't supervised. And then there you go. But I think from a training standpoint, like what you and I do, it's fascinating because that's one more thing we can easily add to our toolbox. Just think of situational awareness, but in that vein as well, like medical, like combatives, firearms. So I like to think of it under that sort of guys. I'm going to try to write some curriculum going forward so we can include that with some of our families.
I think that's a good idea. Kind of that same thing, I'm sure, when you're looking at these abuse situations, and kind of we're talking about not instances of like chronic abuse where mom or dad's beating kid. We're talking about some like crazy felonious action from like you said, could be family member, but whoever. There's some things like some stupid mistakes, like why'd you put the kid alone with this person, or why didn't you vet who this person was, or ask some questions, or maybe the kid's giving you signals that there's abuse happening. Like, are there some things that small children act a certain way if they're having these types of things happen? And I'll say this too. We've interviewed people before that are victims of this stuff. And almost all the time they say, I didn't want to tell anybody. I felt I did something wrong. I felt I was like bad because Uncle Creepo or Pastor so-and-so or whoever that abused them did something. And they don't have the logic and reason as an adult to thresh out that they didn't do something wrong.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a guilt. It's a lot like similar to domestic violence victims, where they figure, well, I must have done something wrong to warrant that beating, or grandpa or whoever. They couldn't be a bad person because they're an authority over me, so it must be something I did. That's one thing I used to see a lot. The other, as I said, was something that should be on the warning side for parents all the time is anytime someone's creating that environment that could be a potential grooming situation. I had another case where a guy lived in public housing and he would give candy and ice cream and popsicles to the kids. That sounds really cliche, but parents allowed this to go on. And if it's just a gesture of kindness, that's fine. But it's like firearms rules. The first rule, okay, he's giving candy. If we violate one rule, maybe we'll be okay, right? But if we violate 2 or 3 of the 4 rules, there's going to be a tragedy. So if he gives kids candy, as long as it's monitored and it's in public, fine. He's the kindly old gentleman. But if they're going alone to his house, whether it's for a freaking piano lesson or tutoring or babysitting, now you've got a situation where you've got an older gentleman alone with the child. Why would we really allow that to happen? If it's necessary and know the person, like I'm a grandfather, I'm watching my own children. Diane and I are taking care of the grandkids and we love it. But even I'm very rarely alone with my own grandchildren. So why would we allow that?
That's not because you're a dirtbag. That's because your wife's there, and right.
Sure.
I mean, we don't need to It's not like your family's monitoring you with your, I want to make sure that that's clear.
Right. No, I appreciate you. You always got to give me those guardrails. But yeah, it's like I would expect that when the grandkids go to school is first question I would ask is why would an adult be alone with them? If they can go to the restrooms alone, or even if there's an issue, an emergency or a problem, uh, have two people there, or don't handle it, remove yourself from the situation, just like we talk about with firearms. There was something else you mentioned that I thought was a great point. You were talking about that podcast you did. I like that one. Um, yeah, gosh, I don't remember, buddy.
Was it
I should
just
have
right
made it.
now?
Yeah, it was just like 2 minutes ago. You said something that was a good example, but I talked about the rules for firearms. That's very much translates to this. Oh, time for another quick story. If I tell you
Sure.
another, here's an example. This is why it's good that you're shedding light on a lot of this stuff. And again, these stories are horrible and I apologize. But during these same years, when I was a young detective working these cases, I got a call. It started out as a medical call, a young child. I have to be careful what I say. There was a young child that was transported to the local ER, and she was in distress, not breathing. So it was presented to us by the young parents as a SIDS death, sudden, infant death syndrome. We used to have a lot of those where we call rollovers, where a mother or a father would be sleeping alone with a baby in the same bed, and they would accidentally roll over on the child, and they'd wake up later and it was too late. So this happened a lot, but luckily we had a system where we were called anytime there was an unintended death for any reason. So it starts off as a medical issue. We're there to console the parents, but we still have to do our job as cops, playing that role. Thank goodness we were thorough. One thing led to another, and we found out that the father had basically killed the young child. There had been, this is when I first learned about this pattern of abuse that you were talking about. That is absolutely a thing. The girl had several fractures in different stages of healing, cigarette burns, different stages of healing. So the young mother would wake up and she was going to work, even though the child was very young still. The father was unemployed. He was home alone with the child, but none of these warning signs were ever developed. And I just remember what that last item is. I'll talk about it in a second. So we find out all this information after the fact. This child had been abused for the last 6 months of her life. Nothing was reported. Everything, I think the mother they'd have bath time and she'd say, "What's this?" "Oh, she pulled something off the counter and it hit her in the head," or "She had this." So it was sort of too late. We worked with what we had. That's the first time I dealt with bringing experts in, some radiologists. We made a good case. Unfortunately, that only resulted in a manslaughter charge. So this guy did
like 5 years or something.
No, even just like a year and a half. So he went on and moved to another state. People have to rebuild their lives. I kept in touch with the victim's family for several years. I can still remember the grandparents, their phone number. It's weird the things you remember. But I'm talking 20 years later, Mick. I'm with my local police department. I'm a detective on the fugitive squad, undercover assignment, totally in a different world. And I get a call from a sheriff's office, and it was in Kentucky. And the guy had did it again.
Killed
15
another
years
kid.
later. Yep. Another young girl came into his life, had another child with her. Same situation. She went back to work. He's home alone. Several things were overlooked. So that detective was faced with the same thing I had. So yeah, can you imagine? I mean, luckily I knew that we did everything we could here. The case was adjudicated, but it wasn't enough. So this will be controversial, but I'll just say this opinion as a cop. When people are locked up on smaller things, and I'm talking legitimate crimes, burglary, for example, if people are locked up and the judges sentence them to the appropriate sentence and they're incarcerated, guess what? They're not out doing crimes. It's as simple as that. So you might catch a guy
about the dog that bites is put in the kennel kind of a situation.
Yeah, because literally you're placed on timeout, right? You're not on the street. And I know that's going to be controversial, oh boy, but you're not on the street to commit crimes.
We're not talking about a guy that's locked up because he got caught smoking a joint. You're talking
Right.
about people breaking into homes, breaking into businesses, committing forcible felony type stuff, rape.
Especially the violent. We can even today just focus on the violent crimes, like
We had
marijuana is legal here now.
the instance in Chicago. I just picked that because a lot of people that push back from what you're saying immediately bring up like, somebody I know is locked up because they got caught with a half pound of weed.
Mhm.
And that's not, I don't think that's what you're talking about. Um, that said, a lot of times people involved in drug trafficking uh, are also involved in other shit too, but that's another conversation altogether. We had a guy here in Chicago recently. I forget his name. I'm gonna look it up right now, but it's exactly what you're talking about. Let's see.
Yeah. So while you're looking it up, for the sake of conversation, just keep that to violent crimes, not even property crimes. You hear about these stories in the bigger cities where this guy had 3 or 4, robberies or assaults or what have you. If they're doing time, then they're not out able to commit these crimes.
Mm-hmm. This dude, Chicago man on parole, fatally shot 3 people, wounded another after being kicked out of a party. His name was Samuel Parsons Salas, 32 years old. Convicted felon, was on parole and has been charged in a fatal shooting. It happened in Portage Park. This was the middle of December. He he now faces 3 felony counts, first-degree murder, 1 felony count of attempted first-degree murder. That was for basically execution style, shooting a girl in the head. So this dude's at this party. He gets violent. They make him leave. The father of the girl whose birthday party is like, "Did you hit my daughter?" He goes out, retrieves a gun, and just walks up and just starts shooting people. So this is all caught on surveillance videos. It went all over the internet of this horrible thing. And of course, guns are bad. This is Chicago and like another gun crime. Like, no, this freaking piece of shit. Let's see. The niece, who's seriously wounded right now, is still fighting for her life, I believe. Ricky Vera, shot in the head. His daughter comes up to help him, and she's like holding her father who's bleeding out. He walks up and shoots her in the head. So just like, straight up executes these people. This guy is out on parole. Where is it? He's out on parole for a double homicide that he was involved in, that came about from a home invasion only like a few years ago. And I don't think he was the trigger man, but he was in the house when these people got killed where they were home invaders. Just a couple years later, he's out on the street. And like, that's what you're talking about. The story I just shared of that guy raping that girl in the taxi cab. He got 90 days, and actually he only served 11 days
Mhm.
because he had previously been in jail for other crimes not even related to the one that he was ultimately charged with or convicted of. And the judge just was like, "Okay, you've been in jail 49 days, go serve 11 more. You'll get a week and a half for putting your fingers inside of a 13-year-old girl's vagina and making her watch you jerk off." Like, what the? And this guy's out and about, living in the world. And that's the part that I think is so shocking. And people that don't want these folks locked up, there's a lot of talk of like the industrial prison system, industrialized, privatized prison system in
Right.
America that I'm sure has got all kinds of corruption and needs improvement like any government thing. But you rape and pillage, you shouldn't be walking around town.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts on that. Those guys that I've talked to that have committed those kind of crimes, uh, they've told me, I'm just relaying what they've told me themselves, is they're not really able to be helped too well. They spend years in programs. They're very flat out and honest with me. They're like, no, I have this issue and it's not really going to go away. You can't medicate me for it. It's disturbing how cold some of them are, but they're flat out. I have never had one that said, well, that was the old me and I'm not that way anymore. That's just my own experience.
kind of interesting part about this discussion, right? Like, I think what you and I are talking about is like fire prevention and suppression. Like, we're talking about smoke alarms, good building construction and design, fire extinguishers, fire escape plans. And then there's something completely different, which is like the psychologists, doctors, therapists that work with I don't give a why your dog just chewed my leg up. Right now,
Right.
I want your dog off my damn leg. I don't care that its first owner beat him. I don't care that the breed is susceptible to biting people. It's biting me. I'm gonna fricking punch it in the head or spray some pepper spray or put a bullet in it until
That's
you
it.
get your dog off me. Right. I think, and so like I've had and discussed this stuff with William April, who's now gone, lovely man. William had this phrase, they're not like us, they're not like you. And there's been pushback from other people in this space that say things like, well, that's bullshit. They are like you, meaning they have hopes and dreams. They want to buy a boat. They want to go on vacation. No, they're not like me. Like, I don't want to kill a baby. I know my friend Dave does not want to do horrible things to little girls. Like, they're not, I can't even think about those things, let alone do them. Like, that's not like me. Your brain is different.
Yeah. And so for what it's worth, the people that I've talked to that have done those crimes, they tell me that themselves. So I agree with you. That's why I like this part of my journey a little bit better, is we're just dealing with cause and effect. Whether it's a dog bite, talk about keep your dog on a leash, do these different things, carry some defensive tools with you, blah, blah, blah. That's a much more friendly space to me than the whys. I'm not a sociologist. Well, let's examine and spend 10 years doing a research on why they do this or what we can do to help them. Why can't they live next to a school? Let's watch out for those rights. I'm glad to be on this end of it where, a court of law convicted you. So that's a given. So now let's look forward to an appropriate sentence. That's the key word, appropriate. But I thought of something else that you mentioned. And again, I'm not the expert anymore on these things, but I can tell you one thing that I saw a lot during forensic interviews. Many years ago, the cops or detectives or sometimes a local doctor would help out, but we had to do our own interviews for children. And then during my time in this assignment, we started having experts with degrees come out and we could take them to do forensic interviews. This is where the person has a nice office, sort of a soft office, not like a police interrogation room. But they would talk to these kids, and what they taught me, this sounds simple, but if we think about it, kids are not sexualized, right? They're a blank slate. It's not like I made an allegation against you, you did something to me during S12, right? It's not that way.
Which isn't true.
Right, not true. S12's legit. But think about this. Kids have no reference point unless they've been exposed to pornography, unless they've been exposed to this in a real scenario. So if a child starts telling you somebody touched my pee-pee or starts mimicking a sex act or something like that, that carries a lot of weight in a court, and that carries a lot of weight with a jury. That's considered better than eyewitness testimony. You probably heard eyewitness testimony can be contradicted and it's flawed a lot, right? So the system tries not to put a big emphasis on eyewitness testimony.
Okay.
But with kids, that's the one exception, is it's automatically assumed the child is telling the truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that sounds pretty basic, but if you're a child's parent and your child is acting out in a certain way or mimicking a sexual behavior or talking to you about something of a sexual content, well, they've got that from somewhere. So if
that
it's not
kind of
your
comes back
home,
to the paying attention, the awareness thing. You have to
Mhm.
know the baseline so that you can see the anomaly. You got to know what's out of place, know the normal, so you know what's not normal.
Yeah, and you can probably put a better angle on this than I could, but here's my raw thought about that. When we talk about defensive tactics, or if you will, we don't want to be assuming. We don't want to live a life of paranoia. We don't want to be ready to draw down on everyone that comes near us. We probably want a smile for everyone we meet, right? But a plan to kill them. So I guess it's the same way this way. We don't want to live in fear. We don't want to have our children live in fear, but we have to start that education, just like we would CPR or combatives or firearms safety. But you're right. At the start of this conversation, you pointed out that people are in denial of this, and there's a gap in our public awareness. But that's easy to remedy. Isn't that ironic? That's the most easy thing we can do, is get some public information out there to be a little bit more vigilant.
I got a friend that's a local detective, and he did the same type of child stuff that you did. He's a really kind man, and so he was often tasked with helping other detectives do the interviews of kids. And his children are grown now. They're the same age as mine. We'd spend a lot of time together. My kids would sleep at his house, but his kids were never allowed to sleep at mine. And one day, it was not allowed. It was just like, why don't they come over to my house? We got the pool, blah, blah, blah. And they can come over to my house too. Like, have them come over. And one day I'm like, what the hell, man? It's like, you think my house is dirty or something? And he's like, I love you, but my kids are not sleeping at anybody's house. And he had seen so many stories of people that were trusted individuals that violated that trust, that he just like lived in a way that like, my kids aren't going anywhere unless I'm there. And so like, there's that extreme, but it was based on reality. I've told this story on this podcast before. In this town, a sheriff's deputy who was in a leadership position, you can look him up. He was also tasked with all the internet crimes against kids, like that, because he had like a background. He was a guy with computers and stuff. It came out that not only was he sodomizing his sons, not only was he filming it, not only was he selling those images all over the internet, but he had a computer that the FBI thinks was one of the largest hubs of child porn. Like they were keeping it all secret from whatever powers that be. And he got years and years and years in prison. But like, this is the guy that the people entrust to go out and catch these bad guys. And that individual was a close friend of the friend of mine I'm talking about, that was leery about people being around his kids. And that story with this monster that's now in jail happened after. So like, my friend's like, do you see why I don't trust people? Like, this is this is my buddy. That's the guy was in he was a captain in the army. He was a airborne infantry guy in the army. He was like a, guy that you're supposed to trust. And even like, so that creates like this weird thing though. Like, well, I can't trust anybody. Like, what do you think about that? Like, do you trust me? Would you trust me with your kids? Would I trust you with my kids?
That's funny. I haven't heard of any other family doing that. It's not, that was my rule, believe it or not.
Well,
I don't think it was just
we just like really quick polled anybody that was a detective for child sex crime. I bet you probably all come to that. Like, the firemen not let their kids play with fireworks.
Yeah, but I think in mine it was more passed on from my mother, because I remember having those views before law enforcement. So I won't like blame it on law enforcement, but the rationale in my family was always, well, if you're at somebody's house, the house catches on fire, for example, they might forget you because you're not theirs, or they might save theirs first. If you're going down on a ship, people may tend to save their own children. Whether that's accurate or not, who knows? But that was always my rule with my family. We had some great friends, and they were very social. My daughter was in a lot of, sports and stuff. And I just told her, I said, look, for your entire adult life, just don't ever ask to stay the night. And there were times when we'd be at friends' houses and they'd say, well, just let Lexi stay over. It's the end of the evening. just let her stay. And I'd give her that look like, we talked about this.
So
This is
your
what
daughter never had sleepovers at friends' houses?
never once, but I never said no for a sleepover at our house. Yeah, so that was just my rule. And that's just me knowing that I'm the one that's going to be responsible. So we're back to that. It's just like if you had your Glock sitting out on the coffee table and you chose not to even secure it. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's so simple to me, but that happens a lot. And a lot of these cases, I'm sure your buddy can confirm, it's usually, if it's not their own, it's usually the friend's kid that was staying the night or that was there for a sleepover.
Say that again.
A lot of times, if it's not their own child that's they're victimizing,
Okay.
well, they're going to engineer, just like the guy you described. That's a perfect illustration of what I'm saying. It's someone that's going to engineer an environment where they can be with the kids.
I've
So
got
what better way than to be the keeper of the internet thing?
I've got the RAIN website open, RAINN, which stands for, what the hell does it stand for? It stands for, you'd think that they'd have that right on their homepage. RAINN.org. It's all a bunch of very bad statistics. Every 9 minutes, Child Protective Services substantiates or finds evidence for a claim of sexual abuse. Of all victims under 18, 2 out of 3 are ages 12 to 17. Perpetrators, this is what I was going to read. Perpetrators of child sexual abuse are often related to the victim. 7% are strangers. So it's not like the guy that jumps out of the shadows and look at my penis, with the trench coat on. 59% are acquaintances and 34% are family members. So 93% of these perpetrators are known to the victim, just to substantiate what you're saying. Out of sexual abuse cases reported to CPS, this is 10-year-old data in 2013. 47,000 of them were men and 5,000 were women of the alleged perpetrators. 88% of the sexual abuse claims that CPS substantiates or finds supporting evidence of, the perpetrator is male, in 88% of those cases. 9% is female, 3% unknown. Freaking horrible. But these statistics, though, just to validate your point, it's not just your opinion. Those are national stats. 93% are known people. I never had anything happen like that, thank God, to me. And I was probably the kind of kid that would have found a candle and caved somebody's head in. But I remember being like grade school, and this guy was very nice, so nothing I'm about to say is bad, but like the pastor at the Lutheran school that I went to did some math tutoring with me. I had trouble in algebra class. So like, 5th grade, I'd walk across the parking lot to the parsonage and the pastor would help me. Like those kind of situations, we just automatically assume that it's a nice person. And like I was at his house. Why didn't he come to the school? Why am I at his house alone at his kitchen table? Why did he not walk across the parking lot? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It sounds simple looking back, right? But that's, again, I equate it towards firearms rules. Now you've got the gun that hasn't been cleared. It's sitting right there on the coffee table. It's the same type of comedy or system of like errors that happen when you point to an accident, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Is it's usually someone that knows, like your guy at the department that you mentioned. He put himself, or they allowed him to fall into that arrangement with access to the internet and those things. Got to be a lot of good safeguards. And it's not just like when you're betrayed by someone, it's usually a friend. If there's some stranger on the street, they're not going to betray you because there's no trust, established, but you're usually betrayed by who? The people that are closest to you.
Mm.
So that's one thing I'd stay vigilant about. But your stats really, this brings to mind, while it's fresh in my mind, this screams out that there's a wide range of preventative measures that we can do and that we can help people to do. That's why this public awareness thing that you're doing is a great thing. So you mentioned CPS. And I can tell you from experience, the police, foster homes, hospitals for that matter, any organization, those are all reactive. So a lot of things that it's in vogue again here in Arizona. There were two 17-year-old girls that ran away from a foster home, and they were found dead about a mile from the place. After 2 weeks, they were found. So they were missing. This is a common pathology that we see. With this goes into child homicides and abuse. That stuff is going on. These kids are chronic runaways. Maybe it's the child, maybe the foster parents become overwhelmed or whatnot, but that runaway pattern is very consistent. But CPS, here it's called DCS in Arizona, keep in mind they're reactive, and their goal is not to come into a home and take those children away. That's the absolute last thing they want to do. And even if they have to do that, who do they turn them over to? A family member first before they'll go to an anonymous foster home. The police departments, they don't want to have anything to do with custody issues or placing your kid or removing your kid. All those organizations are reactive. So who is there that's proactive, right? Who is there left? Who's going to be the first responder, if you will? Right? That's what you guys talk about, be your own cavalry. Well, I think that absolutely applies to this, don't you?
I do. But when you're 4, 5, 6, how do you instill that into a little person? And how do you do it without creating fear?
First thing that jumps into my mind is like when you teach gun safety, one of your videos I saw, you talk about when do you teach your kids about guns? I think that same video could be used for all these topics. I'm a simple guy, so I'm very transparent. Straightforward language. What's that?
You're pretty complex and deep. You always do this little self-deprecating angle where you're like, ah, shucks.
Self-defecating?
Deprecating.
I know, I got you.
Gotcha.
So if you think about it just along those lines, like let's don't reinvent the wheel. Think about like the video you did on when should I teach my kids about firearm safety? As soon as you see any sort of curiosity, as soon as they're able to process the information, right? We've had some classes, people constantly ask me, what age should I bring my kids out to learn about gun safety? We had a little boy that was 8 years old that took a class with me with his 12-year-old sister. This family was homeschooled and they were very tight knit. They were very open with their communications. They didn't shelter the kids much. And I had another girl that came out. She was 11, daddy's girl. Dad took the class with her. It was a great bonding time. But I put that back on the parents. When do you think is early enough to start this information? Like maybe they don't have to hear the scary details, but if I had a daughter, I certainly remember telling her, you're somewhat responsible for your safety. Like, for example, school shootings. I didn't tell my daughter to listen to the teacher and shelter in place, and hopefully the 23-year-old teacher will protect you. We know that that doesn't work. Our family plan was always get off the X, get out of there. I'll find you. Get to a phone somewhere. Let's bypass all that massive crime scene and chaos. Let me just come pick you up and we'll go get an ice cream and watch it on the news, right? Years later, when she became older, we have to have the grown-up talk, right? Well, who's most responsible for a daughter's well-being? The daughter is. So I said, if you meet some young man and he turns out to be a deadbeat and gets you pregnant and leaves, who's there living with the consequences? You are. It's your body. So the universe says you have some responsibility for that because you have to live with your choices. Does that make sense?
Of course.
So I think what we do is we take the same approach. Maybe they don't have to be scared to death with horrible details when they're young, but they at least need to know, hey, if someone ever touches you inappropriately, you need to tell us and talk to them about private parts and, keep it very general and open. But kids need to understand, like we tell them, don't put your hands on other kids, right? Don't hit. I don't think this really should be that much different. Hitting is not acceptable behavior. Same thing here, right? And I can tell you from the police perspective, for those out there that don't know or they have a doubt, the police do not mind. This is what it sounds cliche, but this is your tax dollars at work. That much is true. If you have a thought and you don't call, parents usually regret that. It's better to have something checked out, right?
Sure. I think there's a fine line. I'm not contradicting your point, but I think there's a fine line between, like, you got to use good judgment. Whenever we share stuff about domestic violence or abuse of a kid, I'll get a bunch of messages. This is something you and I talked about yesterday. One of them I got was a woman interacted with a little girl that's a relative, and she's covered in whip marks up and down her backside. And so she contacted a lawyer, and I just said, do you feel this kid's, like, these marks are beyond normal uh, child rearing punishment? Like, I don't think you should hit kids, is my point. But I'm like, does this seem out of place to you? I'm just trying to, like, get, because she's asking me for advice, and I don't want to ever lead somebody down the path of call 911 or something if there's and put somebody, like a family, into a situation where there's huge turmoil if it wasn't
Right.
real. And she's like, oh yeah, it's horrible. And I said, and you called a lawyer? Like, you didn't go to the police or to a school teacher or somebody to report it? So she's thinking about this, and she's like, well, I was afraid to, I'm like, to go too far. But, like, as you do that, this kid's going to bed at night getting whipped. And then when the police do find out, and they find out you've known for days, weeks, months, they're going to say, why didn't you say something? And then you're going to say, well, I wanted to, but, and now you're going to feel like shit. But beyond that, they're going to look, and you're going to say, well, or if that doesn't happen, they're going to say, how long have you known about this? And you could be culpable for not saying anything, or they might not believe you, because if it's that important, why didn't you say something? You really thought this was important and you didn't say anything. So I think people do need to be thoughtful about it. But, like, if we're, like, logical people, the guy that leaves the shotgun behind the door isn't a logical person. But, like, if it doesn't smell right, feel right, all that, like, it's probably not right.
Absolutely.
When I had Clark Friedrichs on, Clark is kind of famous because he was brutalized by a police deputy as a little boy. This guy, they figure, hurt dozens of kids, boys. He used the Cub Scouts to get close to kids. Parents trusted him because he was a law enforcement officer, and he did horrible, unspeakable things to these boys. Clark grew up, had substance abuse problems for years, and one day ran into this deputy who's now in his 60s at the time, I believe, and Clark is, like, in his 30s, if memory serves. You can go look at this guy's story. Clark sees him with a young kid, and, like, all these terrible emotions come flooding back. It culminates in, like, later that day or the next day, Clark going to this guy's house and literally killing this man. He only did, like, a year or two in jail and is now free and is living a life. I guess, people know the story. The judge actually, like, apologized that he had to send him to jail because they all knew the story of what this guy had done to him. But Clark, in our discussion, the one thing he told listeners, parents, to tell their kids is no adult should ever tell you to keep a secret from your parents. Like, unless it's dad saying, don't tell mom about the Christmas gift I got her or something like that. Like, there's no adult should ever tell a kid to keep a secret from their parents or from other adults. And, like, that, he thought, like, from his experiences, that was, like, a good thing to teach your kids. Like, anytime an adult tells you, hey, don't tell mom and dad this thing, it's just between us, even if whatever the secret is isn't bad, it's probably leading up to some bad shit down the road. And that's what happened with this guy. He gave him a little, let him look at porno mags, gave him beer to drink, let him smoke a cigarette, let him do, like, adult shit. This is just our secret between you and me. And built up, yeah, groomed him and built that rapport till all of a sudden it's, let me do some horrible, unspeakable things to you. And had already, he described it as he already had me. Like, it wasn't like this, guy runs out of the woods and grabs you and does some shit and leaves you lay there, there was this whole envelope of trust built that now his mind was, especially being a kid too. He just didn't have the tools to deal with it. So that secret thing, did you see that a lot? That kind of dynamic?
Absolutely. That's why I'm so big on transparency. And again, it goes back to, like, if we think about tactics, that sort of genre, let's train for the percentages. What are we most likely to face in your daily life? You're going to train EDC, jujitsu. You're training for certain events that you think are most likely to happen. Same thing for the kids. So what are the statistics you clearly stated? 59% acquaintances, 34 family members.
Did you write that down?
I did. I'm geeky that way.
Mm.
But there you go. Think about it. Those are the threats that we need to shore up against. Hate to use the word threats in that situation, but this is a threat assessment. This is a tactical threat assessment, just like everything else we prepare for.
That's a good segue into that part of your job. By the way, those statistics from RAINN, I apologize, RAINN stands for rape, abuse, and incest national network. It's the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization, RAINN.org. So you and I, when we were talking the other day, part of your job that you and Diana do is you help build these threat assessments, which kind of what prompted the discussion is we were talking about some of the stuff you're training your people on at TaxSafe. People can sign up and they have memberships where they're part of ongoing. They don't just come do a class. They come to a series of programs, weekly, monthly, with you. And one of those things that we were talking about is you're having these people invest in not just shooting skills, but some physical acumen. They're developing endurance and they're developing good shooting skills in a high rate of physical or a high level of physical stress. You've got them running around doing stuff. And that led us into the threat assessment. Like you're basing that based on the totality of what really could be a threat to them for life and safety. So talk about that a little bit.
So this is just my, approach, if you will, to training. But I started thinking about this when we doing firearms training. We had a couple of people that would have moments of enlightenment and they'd say, well, wait a minute, it's good to teach one-handed failure drills or malfunction drills or dummy drills. It's good to teach that stuff. But if you have like the fugitive team, we would train every Friday. We're at the range. What if we have limited time? Let's focus on the biggest percentages that we're going to be faced with. Getting out of a car or approaching someone on foot, they reach for a weapon and we have to fire. So even though it's good to train all this other stuff, as trainers, we're going to keep that in mind. Don't waste time trying to invent some new wrinkle. Train for your most likely scenario. And if you talk to like Z Durham or any of the guys, okay, they're military things. They would train for one thing. Maybe they're getting ready to go on a convoy. He had some fascinating stories about that, right? Remember when he talked about nods, whatever, comms, I forget. Fascinating stuff. But guess what? He doesn't do that anymore. So now it's a trip down to the gym or it's a job with his wife, right? So he's got a whole new matrix of threats that he has to engineer for. So to sum it up, here's the approach we take. Let's say you have a couple of our clients, let's say they're realtors, a man and a wife, professionals, they're in their 50s. Their kids are grown and gone and they live home alone. They do a lot of showings and sometimes they get a little creepy feeling, when they're doing this, or their next threat might be a possible home invasion or an armed burglary while they're home. Sometimes they work from home. Their personal threat matrix is going to be a lot more liberal. They can pretty much have a gun in every room. They can have a big canister of bear spray. Their personal threat matrix is a lot different than, say, Let's say that we have, and every town's got them. Your cool little town there in Woodstock, you got the nice little hip area. Let's say you have a young 20-something single mom, and she's in an apartment or a condo with two little babies. What are her most likely threat scenarios? Would it be like some armed group of bandits that would surround her place, or is it cartel members? No, it's going to, her biggest threat matrix would be, what is her prime, what is her why? What is her prime thing she has to protect? The children. Okay, so what threats are the children exposed to? These are things we help them think through. You know this better than anybody. Statistically, what are the most likely threats for kids? Not to put you on the spot, but generically.
I would
a gunfight,
say,
would that be for a toddler to worry about?
Probably not. Choking would be a good one. Drowning. Yeah. Getting
I
backed
choked
over.
twice yesterday. Yeah, once on an orange and the other I think was a hot dog. No, but yeah, sticking a fork into a light socket.
Sure.
A peanut allergy. So we want to help people to develop threat matrices that are in perspective to their own lifestyle, personalized, whether that's a church group or an organization. We've done a few schools, churches, small family business, or even a family. We've had private families come and we'll go over to their house one evening and talk about those things.
It seems like a lot of time folks are interested in building the bunker and getting the 50 cal mounted on the roof. And at the same time, like you said, they've got a toddler walking around with out the little things in the outlets, the little plug covers, or they've got the bleach bottle with the loose cap under the sink. Just that silly. I don't like the term low hanging fruit because it's not stuff you want to harvest, but like, go close the fence gate. Don't be a dumbass. Go put up a rail around the swimming pool, or whatever. That stupid stuff, not stupid stuff, but those things that are so immediate as health and life risks, that almost like poison control center. I'm sure there's great stats there, but we get so comfortable around certain toxic things. We're comfortable around the shit because we're just exposed to it. Cleaning guns. Like, I talk about that stuff constantly because I own Gunfighter gun oil, but we're not even thinking about that. We've got toxic chemicals, lead, which is totally poisonous, and people are at like their kitchen table doing it, but we get so comfortable with the stuff that we don't even think about it. Probably the same way we're comfortable sending the kid off with strangers, and we just hope it won't happen to us.
So I think the biggest thing I like to tell people too is I give them the disclaimer: we're not trying to preach that you live in fear. Go out and have adventures and live a great life. As you say, a long, healthy life. Don't be living in fear. Go on your adventure, take your trips, but just have a little common sense, right? Have a little bit of common sense with your treasures. So in this case, we're talking about kids. But along that same line, we talk about threat matrices. If we think about some of the coolest training we've done is medical, right?
Mm-hmm.
We get a lot of medical training on the fugitive unit. The U.S. Marshals have a great tactical medical program. And a lot of our stuff was geared towards, like, our instructor would be a grown man in full kit, plate carrier, mags, a rifle. He'd go into our shoot house, which was in our office, and he'd plop himself down on the floor with his back against the wall and say, okay, I'm hit, get me out. My gosh, dude, a grown man with all that gear, trying to get him through doorways. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. And then try to get him into a minivan or a pickup to drive him to higher medical, right? So we spent years doing that, and that's cool. But if you think about, what do we really have locally? What are my clients, my members, going to be exposed to? Are they going to be, in a Humvee with Navy SEALs and they get blasted by an explosively formed penetrator and they got to cut out and apply tourniquets? No, they're not going to have that. So it's fascinating to think about what's highest on our threat matrix in our daily lives.
Falling off a 6-foot step ladder, trimming the apple tree, or putting up Christmas lights.
That's to Mrs. Turley. Is that what you're referring to? Because that happened to her, remember?
No, I wasn't thinking about her, but that is like something that happens every day. But yeah, I do remember.
Yeah, and matter of fact, too, one of my clients, him very well, Brian, you'll see him in March. Same thing, fell off of a ladder. He's got some hilarious video that was from his backyard cameras of a grown man falling like that. It's watching an aircraft. It's like watching an aircraft go down. You can't look away. You got to see it when you come. But you're right. That's a good point, is those are the biggest things on our threat matrix. Accidents at home. I had a carpenter here doing some work for me a couple of years ago. Didn't hear anything or see anything unusual. And he comes to my back French doors, knocks on the door, and he goes, "Hey, I need help." He's holding up his index finger. He's got a nail through it from his nail gun. It's all the way through it. So that's a perfect example. Am I going to grab my U.S. Marshals issue IFAC and throw him on the ground and cut his clothes off with my shears and start doing a March algorithm? No. The guy just probably needs a ride to the urgent care, right? And a shot. So we think about things like, I bet you've run into it, but diabetic issues. Have you had someone just fall out?
Not in class, but yes, I have been involved in that for sure.
Like out in the world?
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens. So I'm going to look for products that I can include to maybe help that, something that would be safe. But the biggest thing also is, cardiac incidents, some sort of cardiac issue. And then I asked my medics, we just did Care Under Fire Saturday, and I had 2 paramedics out there with me. And they mentioned the biggest thing is car wrecks. Huge deal. I know something similar happened to you before, right on your way to the airport.
Numerous times. I've been involved in 20 wrecks as a bystander or somebody that got hit. But which airport instance are you talking about?
You were on your way to Sky Harbor in Phoenix.
Oh, God. Yeah, I forgot about that story. That was nuts. I had to leave that guy.
Yeah. Yeah, which is one of the things we talk about, and I'm sure you guys do this too. But one of the biggest things we mention with civilians, and I really geek out on this part, is if you can, in those situations, call out to the person before you risk life and limb to do some sort of a rescue. Make sure you have a viable victim. Like, I don't want my clients to go try to rescue a dead body and they get hurt or maimed, right? So we talk about heavy bleeding. What does that really mean? What does that look like to a layperson in a parking lot? Are they responsive? Because if you think about it, they're not responsive. What can you literally do? We could go up and grab them and bring them to harder cover and possibly start assessing them, but we have no tools. What can we really do if they're not responsive? They bled out to the point. In other words, just don't rescue a body. Make sure it's feasible, and make sure you're not adding to the body count by going up and being another victim. But anyways, we're going to take a look at a lot of our stuff that we do and try to make it accurate for everyday users.
It's kind of become a weird firearms training and the people that are involved in it. I had a conversation this morning with John from Filster Holsters, and we were kind of touching on this. Medical training and medical preparedness is not an IFAC with a hyphen chest seal, some quick clot or some other hemostatic agent, and a tourniquet and a combat dressing. That is a lightly built trauma kit for a very narrow window of injury to the human body. It's like which is cool to have, but like you just said, cardiac issues are one of the number one killers of adults in the world, and probably will always be, because without a heart you die, and our hearts eventually fail. But people will tend to go out and they buy these things and they get training or they don't, and then they think, I have medical training. No, you have a bit of training that's a very narrow window of damage to the human body, bleeding, right, and or holes in it, which is cool. But what about CPR? You just talked about an instance of some guys using an AED that luckily somebody had to save somebody's life, right? You and I were talking about that yesterday. I have a friend that's a firefighter paramedic that off duty twice did CPR, like at a kid's baseball game. One of the instances was at a closed school, and he sent somebody to go break the door open of the school, knowing that there would be an AED in there. And because there was a man present that was physically capable of demolishing the door to get into the school and then retrieving the AED and coming back and doing it all with purpose and haste, they saved the dude's life. But like an IFAC doesn't fix that. A brand new North American Rescue Generation 7 tourniquet, that you verified has come from North American Rescue. Like, that's like the conversation, right? Don't buy Chinese tourniquets. Don't buy knockoffs. Like, yeah, that's cool. But what about like when somebody's in fatal heart rhythm, where you need an AED? Do you have one?
So yeah, I think that's important that we can speak openly and challenge our skill sets to say, you know what, this is obviously a hole in our training that we do. Now, we've spent several years getting up to speed on what the Navy SEALs and CAG does. That's fantastic. That's been a fun run and everything. And in my case, it has helped people. We've been able to save some of our teammates, awesome. But now it's a different set of challenges. I think it's good. That's why it's good for trainers to rub elbows. Don't be afraid to, like, as we used to say in our team, don't be afraid to show your ass to other people. If you get out and stumble through something, it's going to help you to be better. One of the first things we do is we have everybody bring their quote IFACs, and it's usually something they purchase from Cabela's or a sporting goods store. And the first thing they'll notice is they don't have components, but they thought, well, they buy it from a marketing. Well, this is a range first aid kit. Right. So they assume everything is there. But we like to have everybody open theirs and look at the components, take them out. I was obsessed with using a Sharpie to date all my stuff, the chest seals, and
makes great sense.
And then we send a newsletter out to our clients every month, but I would try to say, hey, pick a day, whether it's tax day or New Year's Day, whatever it is. And then one day is change all your batteries, optics, flashlights, smoke alarms. That's something you talk about.
Hey, real quick, before you get too far from that, you've talked about this in a previous discussion with me on the podcast, but the story about your downed Marshal and you guys that needed a chest seal. And so you went to get the chest seal that had been in the Arizona vehicle for months in the heat. What happened when you guys opened that up? So you've got a partner that's been shot in the chest.
Yeah. So we're kneeling over him, and my truck at the time was a big Toyota Tundra. Every one of my vehicles, I keep on the passenger headrest an IFAC. The 3 vehicles I own personally in our fleet, whether it was the chief of police all the way down to an undercover truck like mine, you're going to know that passenger side headrest has the IFAC and a TQ in it. So my partner had his city issued first aid kit, and the city was, forward looking. They outfitted us with this stuff, but there wasn't a follow-up plan. So he grabbed it. It was one of those Roush. It was in a white plastic package, one seal, and you could see that it was discolored and yellow on the outside. And as soon as he ripped it open, his training snapped in. He did an incredible job. But as soon as he ripped it open, the occlusive dressing itself just literally fell apart. It was yellow. And he looked up at me. That's one of the things that he has issues with today. Like I said, about with parents, these moments will stick with you. He looked at me and he had tears in his eyes, and we're standing over kneeling over our comrade. And he says, I'm out. I don't really know what that meant, but I'm out. Like, I can't help him. And he looked at me like he's going to die. So luckily my partner next to me had his rifle covering down on the front of the store. And I said, grab my IFAC. He knew right where it was, because that was the seat in my truck he sits in. So Mrs. Turley had just ordered me new chest seals 2 weeks before. And my thought was, I didn't want to rely on the city, even though they were great. The Marshal Service, DOJ, I didn't want to rely on those folks because that's my gear. I can only rely on myself for that stuff. So thank God that worked. That guy's back to full duty, by the way, chasing bad guys.
So moral of the story, the product is perishable. The heat degraded those chest seals. You happen to have a new one that your lovely wife ordered and you stuffed in your kit, and you were able to seal up his chest to get him to a higher level of care.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is why you write the dates on shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. So that's a system, right? The stuff we've been talking about, all of these plans and strategies and way of approaching life to have success. Like even something it's always some little, I don't want to say silly, but some little detail. Like I had an IFAC, but I negated to check the date on it, and so the thing turned to craft or crate paper when I needed it. Like there's little tiny details matter.
Mm-hmm.
I put the lug nuts on, but I negated to torque them specifically, and they fell off. Or as I did the first time I changed a tire as a 16-year-old, I tightened them all the way and sheared off the lug studs.
Nice.
I literally tightened them so much, I broke the lug studs off of my truck. But little detail, I tightened them all the way. So you were saying, you're talking about down that thread of having the students pull their gear out, inspect it, which is interesting. If they're finding out they've got this thing, they don't even know what's in the box. They just assume that Cabela's or whoever, and no harm to Cabela's, great store, sold them what they needed. It's kind of where you were going with that.
So they're going off of that. And these are some shooters that are, these are good guys, good gals, but they go off what that packaging says, like shooter's first aid kit or range first aid kit, and they don't realize it's not really a kit for penetrating traumatic wounds. It's like a first aid, what we call a boo-boo.
Band-aids and
a boo-boo kit or an ouch pouch.
Pepto-Bismol.
Right.
My tummy hurts.
Yeah, I'm actually working on being sponsored by them. That'll be great.
Pepto.
That'll be a patch overall. Yeah. No, but I think that's good. And what I try to do is I will stock up on, of course, trainers, hyphens, C-locks, and all that. We have the training modules, but then I'll keep a stash of current stuff. So if they say, hey, I don't have that, well, here you go, take this. They may not be able to afford $120 IFAC, but at least that I can know when they leave my class, I've given them a new set of seals, some new C-locks, or maybe a cat tourniquet or a soft tee. So even though they're just buying that one item, I'm not going to make a fortune off of that, but yet we know that they're leaving with the right components.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can I mention somebody else cool, one of your training partners?
Please.
Don Deo.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I met those guys through your S12, and I was doing a job for one of our local churches. This is the consulting that I'm talking about. And what we came up to, we was going to do 4 sessions of firearms training to get everybody in their church security staff permitted for their concealed carry weapons, and then 4 sessions of hands-on firearms training. And then there was 3 sessions of medical training to make sure everybody was up on CPR and everybody had an IFAC. So I called Don Deo after meeting those guys like Dan Hudnett and those guys with your class. And he talked to me personally on the phone, and I asked him, this is our mission. We'd like to have some sort of clear, transparent bag. If we can get it to fit in a cargo pocket, Arizona, they wear shorts, even at church, or a sport coat, we want it to be physically on them. And he helped me put together a whole mess of kits. And those went out like hotcakes, but that's kind of, we use those as a model. So one of them, that's been just over a year. So one of our students Saturday brought out that kit, and we use that as a measure to say, cool, this is assembled by professionals, and this is what you want to have as a go by.
Yeah, Don's company, which is my go-to for that stuff, sells top-notch equipment.
Yeah, I agree.
And he knows what's up. He was an 18 Delta for years and lived it not only in the Army on an A team, but as also a firefighter paramedic in one of the busiest counties of Florida. So he knows the job of saving people.
Yeah, those guys are impressive. I know at S12, there's so much experience there. That alone is, I guess you could go out and shop for components to put into a first aid kit, but the experience behind it. Like he told me about this particular sort of clear packaging we wanted. He's speaking from experience. I didn't know any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So let's bring this full circle and wrap her up. What are some like key takeaways for parents, teachers, people that are in the care or custody, that have children in their care or custody, that they should be aware of, think about, look at, et cetera, to keep their children safe from predators?
Yeah, good. So I'm happy to give my 2 cents. The first one is something that you're already doing is, let me just reinforce that for what it's worth. The first layer of our security, public awareness. And I know yesterday you posted that. There was a couple of controversial comments. Not too bad though, right? You know, like when you mentioned about the cab driver.
There's a lot of people that are very much angry, I think, when they see those things. And make no mistake, half the reason I shared that was to chastise the judge that only gave this man 90 days in jail.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted people to also understand. I think a lot of people lost sight of that. Like the point was to challenge people to pay attention to their local elections and ask judges, are you going to be
Mm-hmm.
tough on perverts that rape kids? Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's good that, and I know sometimes you're going to have trolls. I'm starting to kind of experience a little bit of that too, but it's worth it to, oh, there's my little grandson. Hi, guys.
Hey.
um, but it's worth it to generate that public awareness. People have got to understand uh, this information is out there and it doesn't do any good to hide our heads in the sand, right? So that's the first layer of security. Second layer is, like we talked about with all the other training we do, situational awareness. Just your videos are a perfect example. Same thing. And I would just add that in to the skill set, because it's no different than watching out for a mugger or what to do in case of a car wreck in some remote area.
Sure.
Same type of situation. The third thing I talk to people, and we should all incorporate this in some of our training classes, is hands-on training for the kids. But what does that really look like, Dave and Mickey? You say that, it sounds good in an interview, but what does it look like? Well, scenario-based training, just like we did at S12, right? Get your kids, and maybe a lot of, like we train a lot of families, even from the police department, they do not want to train their own kids or their own spouses. I get it. Send them to us. But we can incorporate that same, and again, it could be innocent. The kids don't have to understand that it's about some child molest or pedophile. Let them think it's some little secret. Make a game, but hey, you know, this person says, let's keep this secret just between you and I. You know, do some of that scenario-based training.
And so then the outcome of that would be, what do you do? Well, I come home and I tell mom and dad.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And you know what? If the worst part about that is I'm trying to find a secret gift for Miss Diana for her birthday, like a new SIG P365, so romantic. But the kids are with me and they snitch me off. So be it, right? Come on, that's a small price to pay to generate that kind of situational awareness with the kids. If they hear that word secret and that triggers them to go talk to someone, absolutely. Right. You kidding me? That's good stuff.
I dig that.
That's all I got as far as those.
I appreciate it, man. I appreciate your time and energy sharing some of the stuff that you've learned. How do people find you? You don't travel outside of AZ to teach right now, but you work out of the Phoenix area. How do people find you?
Yeah, we're in the greater Phoenix area. We do travel around Arizona. We don't go out of state. The only place I go out of state to is your stuff. Illinois, you had me over there, Tennessee. Nice. But we're taxsafeaz.com. We're on TikTok. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TaxSafe, TACSAFE.com. And feel free to hit us up. And you can check out our website, our monthly classes, our schedule is all put up on the website.
That's awesome. You guys that viewed, listened, I hope that you enjoyed it. The purpose of us talking about this is definitely not for views and likes. I find zero enjoyment or pleasure in talking about children being abused or hurt in any way. I think it's a lot more important than talking about how to do faster bill drills and things like that. And there's a time and a place for that, and do that if that's your thing. I'm compelled to talk about this stuff, so that's why we do. If you've got a story that you want to share, reach out. If you've got a question, reach out. If you know somebody that is in a bad situation and you don't know what to do, reach out. We don't have all the answers, but I know people that do probably have the answer. So at the very least, we can try to connect you. Spoke to a father yesterday. I'm going to tell his story today on the internet. His daughter was stabbed and murdered by her boyfriend several years ago, who's sitting in jail right now in Texas. And a similar story to the one Dave told is this guy might only end up getting charged with manslaughter after stabbing this young lady in the neck numerous times and her having to bail out of the car and him trying to run her over. This guy was a Border Patrol agent, the father. He was a Ranger in the Army. It's a good person whose 27-year-old daughter was taken from him. And we ended up speaking yesterday for probably an hour. And for two reasons. One, I want to tell the story about his daughter. I want that to be useful to others. But two, he needed to get some shit off his chest. So I'm available. Hard stuff to deal with. Training is important. And let's talk about who this video was brought to us from. I'm opening a package. I'm wearing his shirt, Protection for Humanity. This podcast today was done by my good friend from Tour Protection. Oh, look at that. He gave us a nice bag. Tour Protection. He's been on the podcast and he just launched a new book, Protective Perspective, Mr. Todd Fox. You can get this book, Protective Perspective, a peek behind the curtain at his, oh, look at this. Look at this. You'll appreciate this, Dave. Author signed the book and he wrote, Mickey, insert dick joke here. Thanks for the continued support. Love you, buddy.
That's awesome.
He literally wrote something about a dick joke. But
I love it.
Todd is also was a respected police officer and now works in the protection industry for the tour business. And this book is all about, I wanted to bring this up today. It's all about what he does to keep the principals, the movie stars and stuff safe, the concert people on the road. And it's a bunch of super easy to read, easy to digest tidbits about what a professional in that space does, which I think you can apply to your life. So check that out, Protective Perspective, which you are going to be able to get this book at tourprotection.com, I do believe, tourprotection.com. So thank you, Todd. The rest of you, be well. Don't be dickheads. Go look my friend up at TaxSafe AZ. By the way, we will be with you in Arizona in just a few weeks, March of 2023 at Cowtown Range, which is going to be awesome.
It's going to be fun. Thanks for getting the word out to this. This is important stuff.
If you think of something else and you want to talk about it, let's do that.
Roger that.
Be well. Don't be dickheads. Tell somebody you love them. And thank you, Mrs. Turley, for letting your husband talk with us.
Thanks, everybody.
Visit our website, CarryTrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., CarryTrainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@CarryTrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@CarryTrainer.com or CarryTrainer.com. What are you doing in the podcast room, Steve?
I'm writing a national anthem. It's going to be at folk festivals for Gunfighter Gun Oil.
Oh.
Let me tell you about gunfighter fighter.
Just gonna get my lighter out. I don't have it.
It wasn't even Bob Dylan. It was like a love story.